Hi folks, I'm Bobby Bovell. I'm grateful to be here with you guys at Mount Pisgah for your digital discipleship journey as one of your virtual pastors. Today I'm going to be looking at answering this question: how can I have a personal, intimate relationship with God? Let me first establish a bit of context for where the term personal relationship with God actually comes from. And for this we need to reference the Protestant Reformation of the mid-1500s, when Martin Luther and other church reformers began to question the idea that one could pretty much commit any transgression, then simply go to the priest for absolution. I mean, everything from little lies to adultery to murder, you could wipe away your guilt once you bought an indulgence, which is quite literally a financial payment that you made to the church, enabling you to just roll on with your day like nothing happened. And Luther moved away from the idea that there was a clergy you had to go through and a handling fee you had to pay to access the divine. So this reordering of spiritual possibilities gave birth to the idea that a personal relationship with God was ontologically possible because ordinary people could now go direct to God. In much the same way as in our own time, the DTC or direct to customer trend made feasible by online retailers, the most obvious example of which being Amazon, of course, where Jeff Bezos went around the bookshops and made anybody a potential buyer or seller in the marketplace. In the church setting, people's perception of the nature of reality shifted, and being cut out as middlemen, the clergy became largely spiritual advisors and, rather than gatekeepers. And the reformers argued that this new way of relating to the divine was in fact closer to the original intentions of both earlier versions of the church and the teachings of Jesus himself. And there's a lot of truth to that assertion. Jesus pioneered a fresh understanding of faith which empowered his followers to navigate the challenges of connecting with God, to prevent them from getting weighed down with religious baggage on their faith journey. And Jesus did this by describing God metaphorically as humanity's father, effectively circumventing organized religion and taking God DTC, so to speak. There's a story that Jesus is recorded to have told in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 15, verses 11 to 32, about a man who has two sons. The younger of them, we'll consider the older one a bit later, but the little brother asks his dad to pay out his inheritance, which doesn't sound like an unreasonable request to our contemporary ears. It's pretty standard in Western culture for the parents to break off a little bit of financial support for their kids, a down payment for your first home or your college fees, perhaps. But in ancient Hebrew culture, you never got your share of the family estate before your parents died. So requesting this early endowment was an insult tantamount to patricide. However, instead of telling his son where to go, there's an unexpected plot twist when the father shows the son the money. The son moves from home, where he burns through his cash, leaving him destitute, at which point he decides to go back to his daddy. And basically, when he gets home, his father welcomes him with open arms, instead of, as Jesus' original audience could quite reasonably have expected, chiding his youngest son for squandering the family wealth and disrespecting the king. So this interaction between the father and his two sons reveals a great deal about the kind of vibe Jesus is dealing with when it comes to how a personal relationship with God works. Using this story as a model, I'd like to talk about Christian spirituality and how you develop an intimate personal relationship with God. Firstly, you've got to place your emphasis on God as Father, because this opens up new doors when it's not all about you. Jesus' parable challenges us to keep a keen focus on the fact that it's the Father's love for the sons, that drives the relationship. And therefore, our task is simply to become practiced in accepting that love. Now, I can almost hear the gears in people's brains grinding when I talk about spirituality like this, where you don't have to do anything but accept the love. But let me be clear, that doesn't mean that a personal, intimate relationship with God is achieved if one is in a passive posture. The son makes an active decision to return home, thus positioning himself somewhere that his father can get at him. For a relationship to be intimate and vital and refreshing and real and have a positive effect on your well-being, it has to be proactive, whilst keeping in mind that a personal, intimate relationship with God is a process, not an event, and it's a lifelong commitment to a search for grace and transcendence. And no matter what types of spiritual practices you engage in, whether prayer, meditation, or reading sacred text, to name the obvious ones, but there are others like celebration and service and silence and communion and praise and community and curiosity. But whatever you do to develop this relationship, we stay healthy by viewing these practices as the roads that we travel on our journey to an intimate encounter with the divine, rather than the final destination or an end in themselves. And a personal, intimate relationship with God happens when you learn to enjoy the trip, not when you're stressing out about how well you're doing. Prayer, for example, is about communion and communication with God, rather than convincing him to like you or to do what you want to do because he already loves you. Spiritual disciplines are largely things that put you within earshot of God, where the Father can get at you. And they can be anything. They can be different for other people. They can be as creative as you want them to be. The challenge, however, of the paradigm shift that we spoke about before was that the gatekeepers now being out of the way, the individual was now appointed as their own sort of middleman. By that I mean that making a relationship with God personal led to making being right with God quite logically contingent on some special quality one must possess within, or your own conscience or your character, and your conduct became the new type of transaction, the new type of payment, the new type of way of being accepted by God. But for a relationship with God to be intimate and vital, as we've spoken about before, and refreshing and real, whilst having a positive impact on your well-being, you can't be self-obsessed. In fact, you have to suspend your self-observation somewhat in order to avoid worshipping yourself and thus blocking your own access to the divine. Now, the climax of the story with the younger son, his arc comes to a head when the father throws a massive party to celebrate his return. And whilst this social gathering is taking place, the older brother comes back home from the office, and big brother asks one of his dad's employees what's going on. And he's told, your brother's come home and your fathers are throwing a party because he's gotten him home safe and sound. And that doesn't go down well with the brother, which is understandable because his little brother has already spent his share of the family fortune. And one could argue that this party is now at the big brother's expense. So big brother just throws his toys out of the pram and refuses to go into the party. At which point, the father comes out and tries to get him to come inside. But big brother's in his feelings and he's not coming inside. And Jesus again paints the picture of this father as the one who initiates the relationship. It's not about, in Christian spirituality, how good you are. It's about how good God is. So what's the challenge that the younger brother faces and the older brother faces? It's the same challenge. Being transactional towards God leads to either self-hate on the one hand, or self-righteousness on the other hand. Being transactional in terms of self-hate is when you don't meet up to your own spiritual standards and you hate yourself for it. Or being transactional and self-righteousness is that when you do meet up to your own spiritual standards and you love yourself for it, both things obscure your view of God because they put you in the middleman position instead of allowing you to just accept the love that the Father has for you. Now, I'm not saying that accepting the love that God has for you is passive, as I've mentioned before. In fact, accepting the love that God has for you means also realizing what C.K. Chesterton said, which is that God is always pleased, but he's never satisfied. In other words, whatever you do and whoever you are is not going to make God accept you more or love you more, but any growth that you achieve is so that you can reach the potential to which you have been born. Parents are always pleased with their children, but they will not be happy if their child stays a child. They won't be pleased. They won't be satisfied, rather, even though they'll be pleased because they realize there's so much more this child could do. If a child only ever reaches the level of crawling and never grows up to full size and isn't able to get a job and have a family and live a full life, even though the parent, of course, loves the child, the parent is dissatisfied with this state of affairs because they know they want so much more for their child. It's not about a transaction, it's about love. It's about somebody who wants more for you than they want from you. So the older brother stands outside the party, not willing to go in, and the story of the prodigal son, or really it should be called the story of the father, of the loving father, right, is the only parable that's unfinished. We don't get to hear whether or not the older brother's heart gets softened and he goes into the party. We don't get to know whether he does or not. And I believe that Jesus told that story in that way so that the end of the story could happen in our lives. That we could decide whether or not we were going to participate with the design. That we could decide whether or not we were going to accept the love. That we were going to decide whether or not we would move away from being transactional in our thinking and move away from self-hate and move away from self-righteousness and move towards a focus on the divine and a focus on the love of God that makes a personal and intimate relationship with him possible. So my question to you is, do you dare to accept the Father's love in a proactive and healthy way? The story is unfinished, but we can finish it ourselves tonight. We can decide that we would like to live a story where we're intimately and closely connected to the divine, full of joy and lightness, not hindered by any kind of middleman of our own devising, but instead living in a search, a lifelong search for transcendence and for joy and for grace as a daily practice, as an act of love. I hope that these words have been encouraging for you, and I look forward to speaking with you guys again very soon. In the meantime, let me challenge you to open up your heart to this love and let it open doors to new realities for you. Thank you for listening. God bless.
for joining us this evening for Candid Conversation. If you love what you saw here tonight, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel as well as turn on your bell notification so that way you know every time we go live. Have any questions? Be sure to click the link in our description box and let us know your thoughts. And remember, ain't no judgment on this side. Also, be sure to like, comment, and share us on all of your social media platforms so that way your friends and family can be a part of the community as well and stay in the know of everything here at Mount Pisgah. See you next time.